Please record.
Okay, it's recording.
Very good. Now, the process of anointing a pharaoh is a process that is granted by those closest to the hierarchy of priests, which exist at the same time that the pharaohs existed. Now, we will say this and leave that as it is. So, the process of becoming a pharaoh involves a king. And there was a queen as well. Now we will say king as this is generally the rule. This kingship has a process that not all pass. It is a spiritual journey, one might say. And in this spiritual journey, one goes through many of the layers of experience and comes back changed. And if you look to modern Christianity, there are examples of this. Entering the water during baptism, and then coming back through the water as a new-born Christian or something of this nature. It is a similar concept, but instead of water, there is a dry process, whereas the king enters their sarcophagus, and the priests are well-versed in the process of pharaohification, if you wish to call it that. Ha, you will laugh. Now, this process is involving the king who is naked, and he has a blue sash which covers and goes around his neck, but not to choke, but only around the rear of the neck and falling down the body. They then sit into the sarcophagi, and the priests close the lid of the sarcophagus. This process occurs and is very highly scientifically timed for each individual, as the rates vary between kings in the past. So it has been well recorded of the timings that it takes for one to return. So the process of suffocation, which occurs during the process of enlightenment, if you wish to look at it in this way, is variable between kings. Now, one experiences many mystical things while in the sarcophagi. As one is breathing their last breath, one is processing many energies, lifetimes, and experiences, and assimilating them within oneself. Now, there has been many rituals that are precursed to this very moment, and some of them involve the entering of another soul to assist with the king's natural human soul. So after the process of Pharaoh, we will say entombing, then the lid of the sarcophagi is removed. Now, the person within the tomb is deceased officially, but they are only out of oxygen. Now, they can be revived within a certain time period. Now, as they are revived, they revive with a dual soul. There is more than one soul within this body when they return as the Pharaoh. And they are revived by the priests and then led to their new position within their local collective of Egyptian people. That is all.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I vaguely remember some of the very high priestesses, a specific type of priestess where after their schooling, in order to reach the top heights of, I can't remember which priestess it was, but they do something similar where the priestess has to go into the sarcophagi and they have tasks in the other world that they have to persevere through, and those that do persevere through and are able to wake up after however long this is done, I thought it was a 3-day process, but I could be wrong, will then become the highest priestess, and the ones that don't sometimes die.
Yes. As stated before, not all kings survive the process. Although scientifically minded, the priests also, humans vary quite a large amount. And at times there is conflict within the two souls once they get to the position of possession, if you wish to say it, but permanent soul transference is more accurate. So this can cause the original soul to be lost and transplanted completely by the altar.
Do you know what type of priestess this was reserved for? Because in my understanding, it wasn't just a pharaoh. There was a specific type of priestess that underwent something similar to this.
Yes, this is true. This is accurate. But know that this was a high honor, as the one with two souls had twice the ability of that which only contained one. So this is something to keep in mind.
So what would happen to the kings who did not survive the event?
They would die.
And then what would happen to them spiritually? Is there a reason why they didn't survive?
Oftentimes there were reasons, and the reasons, well, sometimes they have died because of prior altercations before entering the sarcophagus. For example, there was a king who was known to have pneumonia, and he entered the sarcophagi, and he did not return as a pharaoh due to the fluid in the lung.
Was this only done when there was no successor? So, for example, after, let me think here. After Horemheb became a pharaoh, he didn't have a successor, so the priests had to choose. The priest had to agree that the first Ramses the First would be even though he was common, would be a good pharaoh. Is this where the priests come in versus having a successor and no successor? Like, I can't imagine this is done when you actually have a bloodline succession versus not having a bloodline succession.
Please understand that during this time of Ramses, the priesthood had gained tremendous power. This power was growing to such an extent that they didn't quite require a pharaoh, but they chose to do so as it was tradition, as the priesthood had such ability to control those within of power that they did not quite require it, but it was more for even a show at times.
Did the successor have to be conceived after the king became a pharaoh to be legitimate?
Can you be more specific with your question?
If there was a pharaoh and he had a successor, would that successor be legitimate even though the king had not gone through the pharaoh process? He was just a king. Would the successor still be considered a king or a pharaoh without going through the process, unless his father had gone through the process of becoming a pharaoh?
We understand. The pharaoh is a process of assimilating two into one. This is akin to the Egyptian profile of their religion, we will say. And regarding your succession, we would say that once one is a pharaoh, it entitles them to particular things that only they can accomplish. The title only goes to those who have this dual nature. And one can only be a king. One can be a king rather easily, especially during we would say, each pyramid had a large being of power, perhaps a prince or king of title, would control this space. Now, as there were many pyramids across the planet at the time, there were many kings as well, and all of them represented their local regions and nodal points upon the planet which they are located. So the successors, not everyone would be a pharaoh. That's why Egypt was the king of the world at the time. It was a localized kingship where everyone brought resources from other pyramids to this pyramid because not everyone was able to accept the pharaohship. One must understand.
So if the pharaoh was only a king and had not gone through his pharaoh process, and he had a firstborn son, would that son not be considered for the throne because the process of the pharaoh was not complete, or would he be still considered for the throne if something would happen even though the process was not complete?
You are accurate in saying that one does not require to become a pharaoh in order to give succession to a king or prince, if you wish to call it that. Now, they had a different term rather than prince at the time, so this is why we say this. But one who had the position of pharaoh had the position of that which was higher than the priesthood, that which was higher than the kings. So it was a risky proposition to achieve such a powerful status. And it was desired by many beings who wished to take part in this experience. But note that not all survived, and kings were afraid to lose their life, even knowing that they would have such treasures in the afterlife. So they made prepositions and positions, and they improved their positions, we apologize, to improve their chances by making offerings to the gods that were greater than that of their predecessors before them.
If kings were unsure or scared to go through the pharaoh process, were they more likely to ensure that they had a successor in place in case they did not survive?
Understand that many of the kings of Egypt had many children. Most often they would have several, over 5 children. And this was not only because they had many concubines and many lovers, we will say, as they are the most powerful man in the area. So there were many women who had great desire to be with these accomplished men. But well, we are losing focus on the question. Please ask again.
If the kings were more likely to go through the pharaoh process having an heir, being that they were scared that they might not survive the event, as opposed to not having an heir and being scared to go through the pharaoh process.
So, as we stated before, there were many children born from these many concubines, and not all children were able to hold the genetics that were looked for by the priesthood. The priesthood would contain, they would look for particular genetic factors within the strain of human. And if they were able to carry the gene strongly, then they would make them successor possible, we will say. It was others were unable to achieve the status of king, regardless of their age, if they had the genetic factor.
And that would that also apply to King Tutankhamun, who was also known to have genetic mutations?
Yes. As one must understand, genetic mutations and we would say more galactic DNA was preferred. So he was somewhat of a freak, one might say. But it was because he was so hybridized at the time.
Interesting.
Are there further questions?
I can't think of any.
I can't either.
Okay.
Very well. We will return the channel.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
You are welcome.